This is the future.
Hello ladies and gentlemen, Sigil Green here and welcome to another video. So we got 4 soul raids event already and you bet we're going to rank them and talk about what soul raid was the best soul raid released so far, what was the worst, where there's place for improvement. So in ranking those, we're going to take a look into account a few considerations. First, how difficult the bosses are or how pay to win the bosses are. The bosses need to be difficult to an extent, but at the same time they need to be difficult in a smart way. That requires better gameplay, and you see improvement as your gameplay gets better. Not frustrating gameplay and not pay to win to defeat. And mechanics that are simply unfair unless you have a certain artifact. Let me give you 2 examples of this. So first you got both Last of Joker and Dawn of Apocalypse, one of the hardest soul raid bosses, but at the same time there's no artifact that can bail you out of that fight, it's only your gameplay that will improve and your damage will improve. And at the same time we got something like Boss Superman, where you kind of have characters that don't work without Dilex Corpore suit. We're also going to evaluate the artifacts that the raids came with. We're going to mainly focus on the let's say main artifact that you get for free, because in most scenarios the other artifacts are going to be locked behind the paywall, and you might be like, but Sigval, you can get them from the soul raid rewards. Look, be honest here, how many times did that happen? And we're going to also kind of take into account the free character that you're going to receive, but not so heavily, because this was a feature introduced in only the newest 2 ones, and if they were to introduce it in Dawn of Apocalypse and Rise of Krypton, it wouldn't be too relevant, since you anyways will have a chance to get yourself Collector over Superman from the challenges, and Darkseid is not a must-have character, but we'll take those slightly into account. So that being said, if you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe and let's get into it. We're going to start off with the number 4 soul raid, and oh, who would have guessed it? Rise of Krypton soul raids. We're going to start off with the bad sides, because that's going to be the focus of talking about Rise of Krypton, and at the same time I did make a whole video about this and why this soul raid, and specifically Boss Superman, is terrible. But yeah, with the bad sides, bosses are hard, but pay to win kind of hard. In tier 1, the boss is going to have a shield ability, the Gorilla Growth boss, and while that's not necessarily a pay-to-win feature, it's going to be a very hard feature for new players to deal with. And you just throw a roadblock out there at them, because most people are going to, as they are new players, finish the first and second difficulty usually without getting Kenflan Sakom in the first and second tier. So by putting this boss here, they're not gonna have a good time. Tier 3 boss Brainiac will have more armor the less energy he has, but at the same time, if he reaches full energy, he's going to one-shot your whole team like it happened in Phase 4. And while to an extent this is a challenging and interesting mechanic, and I will not really mind this boss too much because it led to some surprisingly interesting gameplays that I had against him, there is a stuff that's in the artifacts that they give, which locks the super move of the opponent, which is the Kryptonite Ring. That's the only place where that artifact is going to be useful for the most part, and at the same time you need it at level 10 for it to be fully effective. But yeah, again, this is not a huge deal. Boss of Revenge. Boss of Revenge is fine now. She's okay. You can deal with her. But on release of the soul raid, and I cannot not take this into the accounts. Boss of Revenge, she was so bugged to the extent she has something that makes her disable either the healing or the artifacts that you get, or the gear bonuses that you get. No, passives, gear bonuses, or healing. He has a chance to disable one of these, and on top of that he's going to disable one of your abilities. On release of Rise of Krypton, she disabled all of them! Everything! She disabled literally everything, and it was to the point that only the players that put a lot of money into some artifacts could power through her, and the other players would take like 5 to 10 pips to get through it. And I'm not talking about new players at this point, because by the time new players got to her, she got fixed, most likely. I'm talking about players that were speedrunning until that point, so that was not nice. Then we got Boss Aquaman locking her special tree. Not a huge deal for a lot of players, but a lot of new players are going to have Kenflan Sakomen as their main way of dealing damage, and their Kenflan Sakomen is not going to be that built at that point, so their special tree is kind of the only way to power to the normal difficulty, and that was just a frustrating experience to deal with, to the point where people literally had to upgrade the special 1 of Kenflan Sakomen and just tag him in for a special 1, and that was it. And you take about 25 to clean that, so it was not enjoyable, it was not an interesting mechanic, it was just dumb. Then we get Boss Batman, and I do not consider Boss Batman a pay-to-win character. No artifacts are going to save you from this one. It's just a terrible boss design that's hard in more or less a dumb way. So Batman characters are going to have something that's called a stun bump. The stun bump is going to either stun you if he hits you, or if he doesn't hit you, will remain for a few seconds on the ground. And after he uses that, he's going to also back away. Usually you can counteract that by tagging in your characters and doing stuff, but you can't tag in that fight. You got Chaos Seconds, so you need to be left with only one standing damage dealer. And it's gonna be worse if you don't do that. So there was quite a frustrating experience dealing with the stun bomb, and even for the people who actually were able to come and interrupt him, which is less than 50% of the players playing in Just Mobile, still did have a hard time because he could jump back, jump attack to a special 2 while you were doing basic attacks. And on top of all of that, he was immune to a bunch of stuff to the point where even if you had perfect gameplay and it went perfectly every time, he'll still take a ton of pips to clear. Yeah, just dumb design overall, and a frustrating experience, and nothing else. Didn't find this fight entertaining. Okay, so now we get to Boss Superman. This dude managed to be the trademark of pay to win in Just Mobile. He has dumb modifiers that will make you deal almost no damage with any team. He's annoying to play against, and on top of that, the Oblaze artifact is not going to work, which is the artifact that 90% of the players are going to use at the very least when clearing normal soul rates. So you didn't have access to that. On top of that, you got a bunch of resistances, dodge resistance, making other teams perform like garbage. Black Manta team and Bad Ninja team, unless you had the LexCorp Warsuit, which is a pay-to-get artifact, obviously, were going to kill themselves because their buffs would get turned into dots if you didn't have the LexCorp, and that was, let's just say that was kind of funny. Now getting to the free artifact side of things. It's the second worst free artifact we got from Soul Raids, the Kryptonite Spear. Can be used on some damage during the Rise of Krypton, can be used on Arkham Knight Batman when you're playing League of Anarchy in Dawn of Apocalypse to kind of get rid of the characters that have super shields, but other than that, it doesn't do much. The artifacts overall in Rise of Krypton were a mixed batch. We had some very good ones, looking at you, Beta Club, and we had some very bad ones, which really felt like filler artifacts, but we'll not take that into account for the most part, because there was no chest to get them. Only pay to win or get them from the Soul Raid rewards, though again, that doesn't usually happen. Now getting to a good part, bro, the only good part I think here, if you had a maxed out Beta Club, a maxed out LexCorp, and a maxed out Spear, or at the very least the first two that I mentioned, you would have had a little bit of a bearable experience, but by far the worst Soul Raid, and I honestly, personally, even though I have LexCorp and Beta Club, I don't want it to kind of ever return. It's just terrible. It's straight out terrible. Advent of Chaos at number 3. First, let's get through the positives. So first tier and second tier bosses were easy, so it was accessible to that regard for the newest players, so they don't have access to Kinfla and Sakumen. There were fights where having some artifacts would have benefited you, but mostly all the fights were more or less free to play, to the point where if you paid for the artifacts to have more attack, you'd obviously deal more damage and clean the fights faster, but in terms of mechanics, regardless of if you did or did not have the artifacts, that did not heavily impact how you're playing the game and the overall experience that you're having. And also it has a chance for a free legendary. Raven is the best legendary in the game, so that's a pretty decent plus. That's a pretty decent plus, even though I'm not regarding it that much, as I said, because it's unfair to Dawn of Apocalypse and Rise of Krypton. That's it for the positives. Then into negatives. The birthplace of resistant to everything. Resistant to stun, to lethal, to crit, to dot. Oh boy, that's amazing. Who thought about this mechanic? How do we make characters take longer to kill? Do we implement an interesting mechanic that actually makes the gameplay difficult and makes you take some time until you come up and perfect a good strategy? No, let's just make them not take damage from most of the source of the damage. Why do I even have crit chance, crit damage, and dot damage on my characters? They're not gonna do anything, boy. Boy, that's just dumb. Also gonna mention Boss Black Adam one-shotting everyone. I mean, look. If you played it properly, you wouldn't get one-shot by him, but playing it properly to that extent where he doesn't hit you with any specials or to some point any basic attacks, it's kind of much to ask, and I failed it a couple of times myself. So yeah, boss Black had him in this one with... I had a very high level Shazam in terms of his defensive stats. I think he got to like 60k health, 75% defense. One shot by Black Adam super move, let's go. But yeah, not too much of a big deal, but something that's could get on your nerves sometimes. Boss Raven. Boss Raven is literally like fighting Raven in the arena. She has absolutely no gameplay mechanics, but she's resistant to everything and has a huge amount of health. So you're just going to be locked in an endless fight against an arena Raven pretty much without having access to your damage sources. The free artifact is by far the worst one that we ever got. It has never ever seen play outside of Advent of Chaos, and in the Advent of Chaos is usually used for the high passive stats. And artifacts in this raid were mostly bad, but we had the Sword of Sin and Sword of Salvation, which are two of the most useful artifacts in the game, but again, not gonna be taken too much into account because they did not have chest. So overall, not great, not terrible. It's a number 3 for some reasons. It's a far better experience than Rise of Krypton, but still something that left a little bit of a sour taste in our mouths after we had something better to compare it with. And talking about something better, moving on to number 2, we're going to talk about the last contract soul raids. So let's get into the pros of this. It's by far the most easy soul raid so far. And this sentence says a lot. For the most part, no dump modifiers, no specials, no mandatory specials disabled like a special tree, no character that is resistant to every source of damage known to the Injustice mobile player. Deathstroke is the most easy last boss, so overall this is very accessible to new players, and I do appreciate that. And you get a chance to get Deathstroke, and yeah, he's one of the worst characters in terms of the gameplay that they ever did, but if we're honest, he's going to deal some decent damage, and if you get him, he's gonna be good. So that's a good thing. And the artifact you get for free at the end is, in my opinion, the second best artifact you get from soul raids at the end of it. It's going to be, while the damage part doesn't seem to be pulling much damage of the artifact, it's an artifact that introduces a mechanic that's going to be fun to play, might lead to some new strategies. Overall, a good artifact. I'm happy with it. Now into the bad things. The most low effort raid so far, and I'm saying this, I wouldn't have said this, but boy, we got both Hellboy, Sub-Zero, and Raiden. We had previously in the game introduced a new AI for the characters that updated the old AI and made them, let's say, more proactive, or just play in a different way that allowed you to combo in chop because they would not use specials after before landing 2 or 3 hits. Just a lot of things that made the experience overall better. They didn't bother with Hellboy, Raiden, and Sub-Zero. They literally put them in there with the old AI that you can only find against those fights and in the story modes. So that's a little bit of a bummer. None of the bosses will have interesting and impactful mechanics. Like, I usually make guides on the bosses of soul raids, and boy, there were a lot of guys in Rise of Krypton, and that was not necessarily something good. But for this one, the only guide I made was for Deathstroke, and that didn't even need a guide that much, but I know people would be looking for it, and I tried to do my best to give some advice. But overall, there's not gonna be much change in your strategies, and you're not gonna have a hard time fighting bosses from a gameplay perspective, because generally speaking, they are some of the easiest bosses we've seen so far. It might be a little bit annoying at points, but overall, no game-breaking mechanics, and that's not terrible. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing, even though I present it a bit like a good thing, maybe. Because it's to a point, it's not that fun. Like, for new players, it's gonna be great, but once those new players will learn how to play the game better, they're gonna see like you're just doing this for farming. You're literally just farming the soul raids. It's not challenging at all. And I think soul raids should strike a balance. Again, as I said, I'd rather have this in the situation with Rise of Krypton, but I think soul raids should be more balanced in terms of the difficulty, so you actually have some enjoyment and have some satisfaction after clearing a hard fight, and you know you worked for it. We had the worst artifact badge so far, other than the free artifact, and there is still no chest for them. So yeah, a simple and straight point to put this is the most welcoming soul raid for new players, but it could have been done far better with far more engaging fights. Now, moving on to number 1, who would have guessed it, who would have expected we got ourselves Dawn of Apocalypse? We're going to start off with the bad things, because they end quick. So, Tier 1 Boss Suicide Squad Enchantress is not gonna be anything close to a new player experience, because players at that point will not have access to Camouflage Sakumen, and she'll have a thing where she'll drop a cookie on the ground, and you're gonna be like, oh boy, I'm so scared, but you should be, because she has the same mechanic as Batman characters when they use the special 2, as they put that thing on the ground, and this stays far more on the ground than the Batman special 2, and they back off, and there's something in between you and Boss Harley that can power drain you, lock your abilities, or stun you. And there's not much of a way to play around that, except if you lock it into an infinite combo, you can just throw special trees of Camouflage Sakumen at her until she dies. But that's gonna be the boss of the first tier, and new players are not gonna have a good time against. Let's just say that. Let's just say that. Tier 3 and Tier 4 bosses, Joker and Green Lantern, are going to be difficult for new players. I'm just gonna get that out of the way. We'll go back to them, because they're not difficult necessarily in the bad way, but I'm just gonna put this at cons because they're gonna be slightly difficult for new players, and also the shield bosses in Tier 3. And the last con, I guess, against Darkseid in theory, you're going to have a better time if you do have the artifact Entropy. But yet again, you're going to be fine without it. There are a lot of ways to get around not getting killed by the super move, and at the same time, this actually has a chest. The Dawn of Apocalypse artifacts do have a chest where they are in it. Now getting to the good parts, and let me start with the artifact chest and the artifacts. The artifacts of this Soroid were the best Soroid artifacts we got so far. Not necessarily the best if I was to make a tier list, but the best overall, because every single one of the Dawn of Apocalypse artifacts had a use and had a purpose. Like even the, let's say, Electra X, that's regarded to be like the worst artifact in Dawn of Apocalypse, has a purpose, because it pretty much gives you an Arkham Knight Batman passive where you get health and energy when you kill somebody, and while I don't think that's even worth using in the arena, because as a passive that's good, as occupying a talent slot is not great, you can still use it in phase 1 when you kill the minions at the start to get a boost in power, so even that, being regarded as the worst, has a valid application, and no matter what artifact you got, you would have been for the most part happy with it. And they were in a chest. They were in a chest, and none of them were mandatory, while still having a purpose, and that's an amazing feat that they managed to achieve with those artifacts. Bosses were balanced, maybe a little bit hard at points, but artifacts could not necessarily solve the problem, or not like a big impact like is with Rise Krypton against Boss Superman, while having or not having the artifact will mean a frustrating experience. Let me give you a few examples. Tier 3 Green Lantern. Entropy, you'd have been fine if you had it, but if you didn't have Entropy, you can lock him into an infinite combo, you can use Hellboy as a tank to power through a dot, you can use EGL as support and hug the left corner to not get power drained. You'd be fine. Tier 5 Darkseid, one-shot you with super move. Entropy prevents that, you'd have been fine if you had Entropy. But you could power drain him, you could lock him into an infinite combo, you could use Camouflage Sakumen's super move to lock his super move, or you could just back off to the point where his AI triggers special 1 and special 2 and loses some energy. So yeah. And Tier 4 Joker, I mean, the passive stats of the artifacts would have definitely helped you out there, but there was no artifact to solve the problem. He was by far the hardest boss in the whole Soroid, and there was no artifact that was like straightforward solving the problem, like not letting him tag out or anything. I really like that. 3 artifacts, being the Firebox, was the best artifact to use in Dawn of Apocalypse, and an artifact that still to this day sees plays in as a best choice for support characters in League raids, or if not as a best choice, as a second best choice. So that was great. And yeah, Dawn of Apocalypse was the best Soroid in my opinion. It was done right, and I would love to see more Soroids like that. But that being said, that was for this video. Let me know in the comments if you do or do not agree with my tiering of the Soroid events. All that being said, thanks so much for watching, and subscribe, so I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye!
This is the future.